Hi, and welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns, Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, I team up with Doug to have a conversation with a leader in the broader higher education community. Typically, it's college presidents and chancellors, but today we are delighted to bring to you a leader from a very adjacent and kind of central space as well.
Welcome today to Maria Flynn, who's president and CEO of Jobs for the Future, which is a national nonprofit organization that tries to drive transformation in that space around higher education and between higher education and the workforce. And Maria is joining us today, despite the fact that her organization's big conference starts tomorrow, and she's in probably that pre-conference frenzy. So thanks for being here. Welcome.
Great. Hi, Bridget. Hi, Doug. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It would be, we would normally be seeing you at some conference or possibly if you were having one in person, but we're delighted. This is the Week of Horizons. So for folks at home, if you want, I believe it's free and you could still register and it starts tomorrow. So you should take a look. Last year was, I thought, the best conference that was held in the virtual world. So I can't wait to see what you guys do this year. So I wanted to start off though, Doug gave a little bit of a taste, but for like the person on the street who's just not really sure what this means, when do they call you? When does JFF that's the organization I should reach out to?
Yeah. So as Doug said, we work to drive transformation in the U.S. education and workforce systems. And I like to say that we sit at the intersection between workforce and education and policy and practice. So foundations call us when they are looking for a nonprofit to lead or manage major initiatives. The federal government calls us to do work on issues like apprenticeship and career and technical education. And then increasingly corporations are coming to us to help them implement worker-centered policies and really help them become what we call impact employers. We also work directly with a lot of higher ed institutions, both 2-year and 4-year, and some of the more kind of non-traditional or newer providers as well. So we have a large kind of diverse client base.
Great. That's super helpful. Thank you.
So, and sitting in that, I mean, that's a very active space, a lot of activity. It also is very unstructured. And I'm curious how you look at sort of whose job it is, whose role it is. And I'm guessing it's obviously not any one organization's, but like, how do you assess that overall landscape? There's often a lot of miscommunication between higher education and employers, or how do you assess the sort of current status of the space? It's obviously never been more important than it is now.
Yeah, I think as you said, I think it's increasingly important, and I think it is changing really rapidly. When I think about kind of the learning to work ecosystem, I define it pretty broadly to include, folks like philanthropy, corporations, government research organizations, startups, VCs. So I think we have so many players, especially in the past 5 years, who are focused in on this space. And what we try to be at JFF is to kind of be the big tent, or the convener that can bring those different stakeholders and partners together. Because I think what I have found over time, and I found myself guilty of this, myself over the years of, people get a little too insular, right? And kind of talk to the folks who are just in their kind of corner of the ecosystem. And I think in order for us to get the type of impact and transformation that we want to see, we need to start connecting these dots in different ways.
That's great. I picked the wrong one. So we were all up in space. So I'm curious about, Doug's right. There couldn't be a more relevant topic right now. Everyone's talking about this. And the piece that I want to ask you about is about the skills that, there's conversation around workforce and skills and readiness, and then there's this separate conversation about the value of higher ed. And often I think they can get conflated. And I'm just wondering if you're speaking to a lot of higher ed administrators and leaders, What skills do you think the workforce needs that higher ed is not really, it's like are underappreciated by the workforce, or that we're not spending enough energy really focusing on?
That's a good question. The one that comes to mind is, I think I would characterize maybe as decisiveness or confidence, or it's almost that kind of those leadership qualities. I find that I think higher ed does a great job around critical thinking and problem solving, but I find, how do we, prepare folks really to be decisive leaders? How to help them, quickly assess information, make a decision, and move forward. I think sometimes higher ed can over-index on debates and, going back and forth on an issue, which I think in the workplace can cause some swirl, right? So I think the more we can start thinking about how do you take, kind of the content that we're learning and those concepts and move them into action, I think is what would be important.
That's really interesting, because I'm not sure I hear a lot of conversation about that. We obviously see a lot of colleges starting entrepreneurship programs and things like that, which might have a component of that, but that's not exactly a match with what you're talking about. And that's an interesting. I'm curious if you think there are clear ways for that skill to be taught, or more appropriately learned.
Yeah, it might just come down to like more applied learning, right? So how are you taking concepts and putting them into practice? And so I think that's where, connections to work-based learning, internships, apprenticeship become important. I think more broadly, like maybe backing up like one level, like one thing that I don't know curious what you two feel, but I feel like every year we see a new study that says, these are the 5 or 10, soft skills or employability skills that employers are looking for. And I feel like the decades that, I've been working in this space, it seems those lists don't change very much, right? And so I wonder if sometimes, are we asking the wrong question? So I often think maybe it's not asking the question of what are the skills, because I think we by and large know what they are. Is it more like how do we teach and assess those skills? I don't know. I'm sure you've covered a lot of surveys, I'm sure.
No, and I think that's a really good question. And part of it is, one of the other things I was interested to hear you talk about, because you are so clearly talking to sort of to the extent that there are sides, and I don't like talking about them as sides, but they're often positioned that way. There is this meme that higher ed isn't producing people with the right, quote, skills, knowledge, whatever you want to say. And I've actually heard less of that in the last couple of years than I had, I think, which I think is heartening. But one of the big questions is it that the people truly don't have them, or is it that they don't know how to talk about it, and they don't know that they have them? I mean, that's one of the big questions to me. And I think a big lift is arming people, graduates, with helping them know what they're getting and then being able to talk about it. Again, I don't know that that's all of it by any means. I doubt it is, but it's at least part of it.
It's definitely a missing part. Sorry to jump in, but that's exactly what we found, is that there was just no intentionality at institutions around this particular piece. Like, people are writing off higher ed, and they're missing that it was just that we had never taken seriously that transition between college and career. We had created an office and just been like, okay, box checked. Now let's move on to the next thing, because there's just so many things. And that's absolutely essential. We had to take it seriously. And what we found is that we needed to equip institutions where to have career readiness or career services professionals kind of repurposed as instructional designers to coach faculty to integrate NACE competency language in the classroom, in every single class. That's the thing that has been missing. And sorry, Maria, I just stole that question from you. So but if you have anything,
she turned it back to us. So
you want to be like, that's right. I disagree. Well, anyway, I did want to shift after stealing that question. So again, if you want to answer it, I want to give you a chance. So I've broken protocol there. Okay, cool. Well, I wanted to just chat a bit about you. So you've been at JFF for a long time, and you have It's one of the organizations I really admire in terms of you've not just been able to have impact and to do the work, but you have really figured out how to scale in a way that I just don't see a lot of nonprofits that are purpose driven, especially in this space. It's just really, that's a lot to take on. And I'm just curious if you could share what has been most useful to you in scaling JFF into this massive organization that's having somewhat of a global impact. I mean, I know that, I just feel like it's really setting an impression that is beyond the United States in terms of the kind of work that needs to be done.
Great. So one, I think I worked at JFF as a member of the leadership team there for about 9 years before I became CEO. And when I became CEO almost 5 years ago, I really felt that in order for us to scale and really have the impact that we wanted to have, we needed to make ourselves, kind of relevant to this moment and to the moments in the future. And so we have really set off on a pretty extensive transformation journey. But I think to your specific question, I think the things that have helped us is one, really looking at, what are the skills and competencies that we need on our team in order to meet the needs of the companies and the institutions that are coming for us to help, right? So really looking at how do we do that? The second is, raising the money and investing in the systems that we need to operate at scale. And so we've gone, from a group of us, relatively small group of us all located in Boston together to, I think of us over 200 people now across the country working together. And so just operating an organization that is so different than it was just a few years ago has, required a lot of kind of different ways of how we think about our operations and how we fund that. And then, it's also, I think that this is an issue among nonprofits in general. One is how to emphasize the importance of unrestricted or flexible dollars, right, that go beyond, restricted program grants. And also really looking at, to me, I know there's a lot of debate around whether nonprofits should operate like a business or not. But I actually, I'm in the camp that you need to think of it as building and scaling, an operation, an organization, and that you need to, obviously the work itself is the heart of the organization, but you have to be intentional about how do you operate in the market, how are you meeting the needs of your customers, how are you kind of setting your own tune and not just kind of meeting the needs of funders. So I think there's a lot of delicate dances in there to figure out as a nonprofit. But it's been an exciting, couple of years, and I think we're really well positioned right now for the next couple of years ahead.
It certainly looks like it. I know that many of us who run smaller organizations look up to JFF as kind of like the exemplar of how to do it right. So very cool.
What has been the biggest challenges as a leader in those last couple of years, putting aside the obvious challenges of, say, a pandemic and things like that, but in terms of that scaling, it sounds like you've gone from, you've changed not only in size but also in how you work. What have been some of the biggest challenges, and how have you met them?
So I would say one is, we launched JFF Labs about 3 years ago, which is kind of our kind of market-facing arm, or our kind of innovation engine, so to speak. And so I would say that it was an opportunity though, and a challenge, because I think a challenge in the sense that we began working with a whole kind of array of new clients. We brought in kind of different types of leaders that were kind of new to JFF, or the education and workforce space in general. I think it was the right move to make at that time, because I felt that going into the pandemic last year, if we hadn't made some of those shifts, I think, as an organization, we would have been caught flat-footed, right? So being able to move more into, looking at technology-driven solutions, looking at impact investing, looking at the work of corporations more specifically. So I think just kind of adding on that type of new approach to a legacy organization is certainly a challenge that had to be navigated. And then, I think like all of us, I think operating, a national nonprofit in this space, during, the Trump administration was challenging as well, right? So I think, again, like a lot of careful decisions to be made, especially because of the fact that we do, federal government work is a core piece of our business. So a lot of navigational issues there.
I'm curious about your career. I know. I just want to, could you share what has been the most surprising aspect to you? I mean, where you are now, and I'm just interesting to reflect back.
Yeah, I think, overall, like I just feel that I have been just extremely fortunate. So before I was at JFF, I was at the U.S. Department of Labor for the first half of my career, and was able to work under 3 administrations. So the last part of Bush 1, all of Clinton, and 7 of the 8 years of Bush 2, right? So really, and I think that's why I, do really see the power of being able to work across the aisle on these issues, right? So I think just that experience of working on, what I felt really key initiatives across those administrations, from school to work back in the 90s, or the Wired initiative during the Bush 2 administration, and then being able then at JFF also just to, kind of see a number of, initiatives that had great impact, and the role that JFF was able to play in them. I think what surprises me, though, is just like how hard some of these like foundational rocks are to move, within the system, right? And so I think, a lot of the change that we have seen is, kind of around the borders, I would say. But, and I think it's true for higher ed. I think it's true for more traditional workforce development. There are just some of those core central issues that, I think for decades have seemed insurmountable. I think, or I'm hopeful that we're at a moment in time where some of those things can be questioned more fundamentally. But, I'd be curious what you two think. Like, do you think we're at a moment, or do you think that like now with the reopening, people are like, well, we'll just go back to doing what we were doing?
That's a really good point, a really good question. I mean, I do feel like there is this appetite for change, but it's also people are overwhelmed and exhausted from change. So it's like a two-edged. That's part of the issue, is that I'm like, I think more is possible now than ever before. I also think that people are so exhausted and tired right now. It's like, we know now that we could do it, but we're just like, can you just give me like a 6 months? I should recover, So yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer. What about you, Doug?
Well, I'm spend more time on the sort of, again, higher ed side of this equation, and I've been asking that question a lot about whether the higher education institutions have been given a bridge through, record investment by the federal government right now that, again, desperately needed to help a lot of institutions not necessarily survive, although for some. And I think the question is, does the momentum that had been accumulated and the sort of muscle building of, we can do new stuff, we can try new things, does the higher ed mostly changes when it has to, like a lot of organizations, and to the extent that the federal money relieves the pressure, I'm a little worried that the compulsion to change may ease enough that some of the hardest things, and when you talk about the structural things that are hard to move, part of it is, I think those foundational things, a lot of the answers are fairly clear, and yet we don't have a ton of structures in place. I mean, you talked about the Labor Department, the differences between what's on the labor side versus the education side in the federal government and elsewhere. I mean, that probably is something you've spent a few restless nights thinking about, but it's hard to have the structures to move things.
Yeah, and that's where I
think like there's a moment.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think just looking at congressional committee jurisdiction, right? Like as you're saying, like department, turf. Like I think that's where things really tend to get bogged down. But hopefully we'll see some big changes.
Well, we know that you have a big conference to run, so we will wrap in just a second, but we'll end with two kind of rapid fire questions about advice. I always find this so interesting. I selfishly get a lot out of this. But like, what's been the advice that someone else has given you that has been really most useful to you in your career? And then separately, when people are thinking about leadership, I'm going to ask you what advice you most often give them that's from you.
Yeah, I would say the most helpful advice I received was just the importance of being an authentic leader. And I remember years ago, there was someone who was trying to like give me advice, and they said, you should be more like me. And I'm thinking like, I don't want to be like, I don't really want to be like you. Like, I want to be like me. And I think that that's just a key to leadership is being, authentic to who you are, right? And lead from that place. And then you build teams around yourself to complement your skills. So I think just the power of authenticity, I think, is really important. And, advice I give others, one is, and I think that this is particularly true for women, but maybe probably broader, is just, being okay with making the unpopular decision, right? So being okay with not being loved by everyone, right? Making decisions that are, either not going to go well with, your organization or maybe externally. And I think just the importance of being able to stand in those decisions is key. And I would also say, I think sometimes leadership can be lonely. And so developing just a network of peers, that you can talk with as the challenges, ebb and flow, I think is key as well.
Great. Well, I think that's great advice to give anyone. So thanks so much for spending this time with us, and good luck to you and your team at this conference. I hope, back in the day when we would be in person, you put together this big event, and then afterward you try and, have a little come together, or like, let's all go and, meet down in the lobby, but, rejuvenate. But it's like, nobody wants to be on Zoom after that long. So it's really hard to figure that out.
I know, but I hope folks will tune in to Horizons. It is free. We're going to have both live sessions as well as a pretty extensive on-demand library of content. So I hope folks check it out, and hopefully I'll be able to see both of you in person soon.
Yes. And for folks at home, you just need to look up JFF, Jobs for the Future Horizons. If you type in Horizons, I think it's one of the first things that pops up. It's tomorrow starting, and then it's for the rest of the week, or no, it's 2 days.
2 days. 2 days. We have 3 cabinet secretaries. We have Governor Kasich, and we've got a lot of corporate leaders, philanthropic leaders. So hope folks will join us.
And me.
And Doug, so, you definitely have to come.
Star of the show. Star of the show. All right, well, get your tickets while you can. And your Doug Lederman's going to be there. Well, thank you so much, Maria. As always, it's always such a delight to speak with you. I always find you to be so just like, I think you really did take the authenticity advice very seriously. You've always been very refreshing and just calm and like just very chill whenever I talk to you. So I always appreciate that in leaders because it's a rare quality. So for those of you at home, we will see you the same time as always next Monday. We actually have the chancellor of UC Davis, and hot tip, the way he came on my radar because he had like the funniest tweet ever, where he was dressed as the Mandalorian, and his name is May, and so he said, "This is the May." And anyway, so apparently like a meme or just like a pun that's enough for me. So
awesome.
Can't wait to talk about it.
And I want to say, Bridget, congratulations on your impact report.
Oh, thank you.
I read it last week. It's awesome. So everyone check that out too. Oh, it's really impressive.
I appreciate it. So, thanks. And Doug, everyone's going to come to your thing too. So all right.
Take care.
Everybody, it's been a wonderful week, and we hope this gave you a little bit of positivity, and we will see you next week.